It is a horrific act of violence, and it's not something that we typically see in DuPage County.
A Facebook marketplace sale turns deadly in a Chicago suburb.
It's unconscionable, an unconscionable level of violence that we have observed in this case.
This 19-year-old painter is accused of stabbing a 30-year-old woman who was 5 months pregnant dozens of times and setting her apartment on fire. The alleged motive is shocking, and so is what the suspect did Thursday evening in jail. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Well, how do you make sense of a story like this? A crime so violent it has rocked the community of Downers Grove, Illinois, which is just about a half hour outside downtown Chicago. A mom and a wife who was expecting a baby is dead. And the reason she lost her life, it's reportedly over an online deal.
The state has charged the defendant with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of intentional homicide of an unborn child, armed robbery, aggravated arson, and aggravated cruelty to animals.
And keep in mind, this is all over an alleged Facebook marketplace sale gone wrong. We do have a new development that came in out of jail this morning involving the suspect, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. You do have to sit and think as you take in the information that we have at this point in this case. What would drive someone to the point of such destruction over an event that probably happens thousands of times a day around the world? So let's go back to the beginning. According to prosecutors, on January 24th, Eliza Morales' husband, Gabriel, listed a dark red 1994 Ford Ranger pickup truck for sale on Facebook Marketplace. The defendant, 19-year-old Nidas Ravukis, reportedly expressed interest in the vehicle and reached out to Gabriel that same day. Again, this is something that happens countless of times a day. Transactions through social media, even for vehicles. Now, investigators say Ravukis then goes to the apartment of both Gabriel and his wife Eliza, the victim in this case, and he goes to check out the truck and ended up buying it and then leaving with it that night. That's it. So it sounds like a very straightforward transaction, right? You throw a pickup truck for sale online. You don't want to go to a place like a dealership, so you just do it off market like this, and then someone takes it off your hands within 24 hours. I mean, honestly, a dream come true if you're trying to get rid of a truck. But it wasn't over yet. Gabriel and Eliza accidentally left their own license plates on the vehicle, so the defendant allegedly arranged to meet at the couple's apartment 2 days later to give the plates back and obtain a bill of sale. And this is where this case turns deadly and takes this incredibly dark turn. This Facebook buyer allegedly became a killer. I want you to fast forward now to January 26th. According to police, surveillance video from the apartment shows the defendant meeting 30-year-old Eliza Morales in her apartment at 5:28 in the evening. And at that time, she was home by herself.
The victim met the defendant gave the victim the license plates. The victim gave the defendant a screwdriver. He went out to the truck and came back to the victim and entered the victim's residence.
Now, the door shuts behind them, and video captures the defendant holding a shiny tool that resembles a screwdriver behind his back. Now, here's where things take this dark, gruesome turn. At 5:47 p.m., roughly 20 minutes after the defendant arrived at the apartment, police say surveillance video shows a struggle between him and Eliza near the doorway. The door appeared to open and close multiple times. Police said that the door handle turned from the inside of the apartment in what appeared to be someone trying to escape, but it was too late. Prosecutors say that the defendant killed Eliza by stabbing her 70 times inside the apartment. And as she fought for her life, she told the defendant that she was pregnant. Now, the suspect is also accused of stabbing the family dog, who was able to escape and fortunately survived. Now, you can imagine what this scene looks like at this point: a struggle inside the home, dozens of stab wounds, and a trail of violence and destruction left behind. And that is when prosecutors say the defendant tried to cover up his tracks.
Before the defendant was done, he took available materials and started a fire inside the apartment. The defendant then fled in the truck.
So now it's 6:09 p.m. roughly 20 minutes after the defendant and victim were seen struggling on surveillance video, and the Downers Grove Fire Department received a fire alarm alert from the victim's building and responded to the scene. And that is where they made this horrifying discovery. Court records say that Eliza's body was discovered near the apartment front door, and she was pronounced dead after being placed in an ambulance.
And the response in this case from law enforcement was overwhelming.
The clock is ticking as investigators realize this was not someone who died because of an accidental house fire. They say that this was a murder. The suspect was still on the loose. A manhunt is underway.
The Downers Grove Police Department quickly identified the suspect in this case, and at 11:42, they observed the pickup truck in the driveway on a house on Spruce Lane in Westmont. At that time, the defendant was taken into custody.
Within 6 hours, 19-year-old Nidas Ravukis is identified as the suspect, and he was located and taken into custody. He was charged with first-degree murder, 1 count of intentional homicide of an unborn child, armed robbery, aggravated arson, and aggravated cruelty to animals. And it appears the now defendant did not travel far after the murder. The state attorney mentioned the pickup truck was spotted in a town called Westmont, which is less than 10 minutes from Downers Grove, where the victim lived and where this horrific murder took place. According to investigators, the defendant was arrested at the home that he shared with his girlfriend. The suspect's residence, it's usually a prime place for police to begin their search. And the suspect didn't take any steps to hide the vehicle. It was found right in the driveway. So you have to wonder if he wanted to get caught. During the state attorney's press conference on January 29th, he broke down what was found at the defendant's property after police conducted a search warrant.
And located in the course of that search warrant were boots that it is believed the defendant was wearing at the time of the offense. And the police observed what appeared to be blood on those boots. Additional clothing was also located at that residence. The police also executed a search warrant on the subject truck, and apparent blood was located on the driver's door and steering wheel.
In addition to leaving behind bloody tracks in both the defendant's residence and the pickup truck, the defendant is accused of discarding a trove of evidence at a local department store.
The police continued their investigation, which led them to 63rd and Main, which is an Ace Hardware store, and in the garbage at that location, the police located additional clothing that the defendant had been wearing at the time of the offense. In addition, they located Eliza's work lanyard and work IDs from Lurie Children's Hospital, where Eliza worked, as well as Eliza's husband's debit card. There were gloves that appeared to have been blood that were located, as well as pieces of Eliza's phone.
Now, you have to wonder why, out of all places, the defendant allegedly ran to a nearby Ace Hardware store to allegedly dump a large amount of incriminating evidence in the garbage. You have to wonder, was he panicking? Was he coming to grips with just how much trouble he was going to be in for this? Now, he might have been, because the Downers Grove police chief said in the same press conference that the defendant started to cave during an interrogation with detectives.
We began our first interview, which was not very fruitful, other than telling us that he was there. And then later on, during the second interview, obviously he made statements that implicated him in the crime.
Court records reportedly showed the defendant, once in custody, told detectives that he was at the couple's apartment following their arrangement to return the license plate and retrieve the bill of sale. He then allegedly claimed that he left through the main entrance to the apartment building, but surveillance footage allegedly contradicts that statement because it appears he never left the apartment. Now, it was the second interview that reportedly got a confession out of this defendant. Court records say that he admitted to killing Eliza, telling investigators he stabbed her 10 times, which is a lot less than the 60 they say that he actually did, according to autopsy records. Now, on why the altercation happened in the first place, the suspect reportedly told investigators that he was angry about the condition of the truck that he had purchased and took out his frustration on the victim. Police say the defendant continued to confess to detectives that he started the fire in the apartment by stacking items onto the kitchen stove and using chemicals and sanitizer as accelerants. The defendant also reportedly admitted to taking Eliza's phone with him, later snapping it in half in his vehicle and throwing it from the car window around a nearby Best Buy store. Now, when it comes to the alleged murder weapon, the defendant reportedly told detectives that he discarded a knife used in the attack near another road in town. Now, investigators knew that they had to go to this local hardware store to recover evidence because his interview with detectives also revealed that the defendant went to the store to change his jacket, remove bloody clothing, and use bathroom cleaner in an attempt to remove blood off of him. And then get this. Court records say that Ravukis was crying at times while left alone in an interview room and later accompanied detectives to recover evidence. The defendant also reportedly told investigators that he didn't mean to attack Eliza and that she didn't do anything wrong. So you have to ask yourself, when you hear the evidence that law enforcement say that they have, and then you hear what the suspect reportedly told them in the interrogation room, what happens now? During a hearing on January 29th, the suspect was ordered to remain in custody without bail until his upcoming trial date. His arraignment is scheduled for February 18th, but we are following a major development that happened Friday morning, because we are learning from local reports in Chicago that this suspect was transported to the hospital in critical condition following that hearing. It appears that he has self-inflicted injuries. Now, the DuPage County Sheriff's Office says that it remains unclear if the defendant was at any point placed on suicide watch. Now, depending on the severity of this situation and his injuries, this certainly could change the case as it moves forward. And based on the preliminary findings by law enforcement and prosecutors, they certainly have a lot of evidence to work with against this defendant. Now, this is a case that could very well be brought to justice, but that could never replace an precious life lost. 30-year-old Eliza Morales and her unborn baby, they're gone forever. Autopsy records from the DuPage County coroner found approximately 70 stab wounds, primarily to Eliza's head and neck, with most inflicted by a knife. The coroner also noted defensive injuries and bruising to her genital area. Prosecutors did say that a sexual assault kit was conducted on Eliza's body. The coroner's report said that Eliza was 5 months pregnant at the time of her death, which was determined to be multiple sharp force injuries with soot also found in her airways. Also included allegations that the baby died because of their mom's injuries. Eliza leaves behind her husband, Gabriel, as well as a 2-year-old daughter. A GoFundMe campaign was set up for this family, and as of January 30th, it has raised more than $120,000. Now, on the page, her family wrote in part, quote, "She came into our lives with a kindness that felt effortless. She was the type of person who would give the shirt off her back to a stranger. Her generosity wasn't an act, it was her nature. Eliza was a devoted mother, gentle, patient, and fiercely committed to her family. The way she cared for her daughter, the way she supported her home, the way she loved without limits was a blessing to witness. She worked hard, not for recognition, but because she believed in building a strong, loving foundation for her family. Everything she did was rooted in love. She was motivated by family, driven by loyalty, and guided by a heart that was truly selfless. Her loss is a pain that sits deep within all of us, but her presence remains in every memory, every lesson, every moment she touched. She taught us what it means to give without hesitation, to love without conditions, and to live with sincerity." Joining us now to talk more about this case and where it could go next is retired detective commander with the Chicago Police Department, Will Svilar. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. And it's I think in any case where someone loses their life, it's hard to make sense of it. There's never a reason, why it would make sense. In this case, though, you have this suspect who does not appear to have any sort of criminal record, and then he, to stab someone 70 times, it just is horrific. Like, how, I guess from an investigator standpoint, how do you make sense of how this happens when you're dealing with someone who apparently had no criminal record in the past?
It's very difficult as a regular person like we are and investigators are and you are and people who walk around every day to try to put themselves in a position where you could take the life of an expected mother with such violence, in excess of 70 stab wounds, set fire to the apartment, stab the dog. It's hard to put yourself into a mindset where that makes any sense to you. So as an investigator, you don't really want to do that. but you want to try to collect as much evidence you can from the scene and from other source you can get the evidence and build the best case you can against this defendant.
The police chief from Downers Grove in the news conference yesterday really talked about how lucky they felt they were in this investigation because they were able to solve it so quickly. It seems that they have some pretty incriminating video surveillance on top of an alleged confession that this suspect made. But for, again, from the outside, I think it's easy for us to look and say, okay, you have the video surveillance. You're going to know who this person is. This is a pretty open and shut case. I mean, what are some of the challenges when you come onto a scene like this, where you have fire, where you have someone who sadly has been stabbed so many times? What are the challenges you face and you actually have to go through to make an arrest?
Well, it's a pretty extensive scene. If from what I was reading from the court documents, it's not only the apartment, but there's an area where he dumped some evidence, and then there's his own apartment, and there's the vehicle that there's evidence in. So you've got to make sure you secure all these areas and collect the evidence properly. At this point, God rest her soul, God rest her baby soul. There's not much you can do for the victims, but you have to get this prosecution right. You can't make any mistakes when you're collecting this evidence. So you have to secure the crime scene, collect the evidence properly, and put together a good prosecution against this defendant. Now, like you said, it looks like an open and shut case, but you can't be laissez-faire about it. You can't be, it's an easy case. We can cut some corners. We can skip anything. You can't do that. You have to collect all this evidence professionally and make sure you do it correctly.
It is a morbid question, and it's hard to talk about. But when you have someone who's been stabbed so many times, and then on top of that, you have a scene where there was fire involved, and there's smoke damage, and there's charred evidence around the scene, how much of a challenge is that to be able to take in what you need to tie the suspect to what happened?
Well, like you said, not to be morbid or anything, but you also, as an investigator and someone who's going into that place, you have to make sure it's safe. Now, I know he used chemicals to start the fire on the stove, like cleaning chemicals. You make sure you don't go in and breathe that stuff yourself and damage yourself or any other first responders or the people that are collecting the evidence. So that's a big challenge, to make sure that the scene is safe and secure. But other than that, it's just, I don't want to say it's business as usual, but you have to be methodical and you have to do the proper steps, emotions aside, to collect the evidence to prosecute this offender. That's the key right now.
Does collecting evidence, because we have seen, and in this case, very different from something like that, but we'll see like a house fire, and then later police are able to recognize that if someone dies in a house fire, that maybe they were dead beforehand. How does the fire part of it and the fact that there's smoke like almost contaminate some of the evidence there, or does it? Does that make it difficult for you to be able to take it in?
Well, it could, depending on the extent of the fire. Now, we've had places where the building's completely involved or the vehicle's completely involved. The fire department puts the fire out, and as they're clearing the rooms, they find a body. That's difficult. I don't think we have that in this situation. I think the fire was contained, and I think there's enough evidence present where the fire didn't damage the evidence. I don't think the fire involved the whole building, and I think that's less of a problem than when we do have people that are just found after the fire department extinguishes the fire.
In the case of this suspect, before we talk about what happened as we're recording this Friday morning, where police say he allegedly tried to take his own life, you look at, apparently he was crying a lot in the interview room, said that Eliza Morales didn't do anything wrong, pretty much is saying that he did this. He's admitted to it. I guess how you have this confession, and that also leads to this where you say like, okay, well, here we go. Open and shut case. There's the video surveillance. This case is done. I guess how much weight does that confession get compared to the evidence that you're gathering at the scene?
Well, the defense's job in this is going to be to say that he wasn't in his right mind when he did it. The police possibly coerced the confession. It's not a voluntary statement. All of these things are what the defense has to prove. Now, depending on how the interview went, he could have just blurted all this stuff out in response to nothing. It could be spontaneous utterance where he just comes out and says, hey, listen, or it's a question and answer thing. You have to make sure Miranda was done properly, that he understood Miranda. The defense is going to say maybe he didn't have the capacity to understand Miranda. That's really the only thing I can see the defense even trying, is he wasn't in his right mind when he did this. But a confession's pretty strong.
And I know at the first court appearance, the defense attorney was, and we've heard it before. I mean, this suspect, 19 years old, and sometimes with cases involving people this young who are suspects who do something allegedly so horrific, it's, well, their brain hasn't developed and the human brain's not going to develop until their mid-20s. But in reality, and like I've heard that before, like how much weight does that actually carry to a jury?
Not much. You know, a lot of people on a jury had 19-year-olds. My 19-year-old's brain not developing means, you know, he forgot to save money from his last paycheck. It's not, oh, I'm homicidal until I'm 25 or whatever ridiculous notion that is. It's not going to carry a lot of weight with the jury.
And you look at the news that came out this morning as we're recording this, that this suspect allegedly tried to take his own life in prison. And, you know, sad, you know, another sad development in this story. But with that said, can you use that as an investigator as even more proof to say that this is, you know, on top of the confession, on top of the video surveillance that they have, on top of any witness testimony? Here's a guy who also then, once he was in the custody, realized the situation he was in and how strong the case was, that he tried to take his own life.
Sure, that lends to it. I mean, but being remorseful doesn't make you innocent. So being remorseful is you understand you did something wrong. And I'll tell you, when you talk about people trying to use an insanity defense, one of the bases of insanity defense is the inability to distinguish right from wrong. Now, when you do something, you try to take your own life out of remorse for whatever reason, you understand what you did was wrong. So that does build to the prosecution's case.
How much of the other charges, you know, when we see a case like this, I mean, clearly, if he is guilty of this murder charge, he's not going to spend another day as a free person. I mean, you would assume, you know, he's 19 years old. I don't know if parole would be involved, but he's facing armed robbery, aggravated arson, aggravated cruelty to animal charges. Like, why do those other charges matter on top of the fact that, you know, if he's found guilty of murder, he's likely going to spend the rest of his life in prison?
Everything's a sentencing enhancement. And again, like you said, rest your life in prison. You can, if they tried to say it's a second degree sudden of intense passion, well, that's X amount of years in prison. But if you add everything else onto that, you put every charge in there that's applicable. Every single charge is applicable. You put it on there for an enhanced sentencing.
When it comes to the motive, and this is the part that it's just, you know, and we talk about so many bad cases, and there's never one where you're like, well, it makes sense as to why this person killed this person. But in this case, it was a Facebook marketplace deal for a car. And then a couple days later, they're exchanging plates. And then apparently he goes and he allegedly then attacks this 5-month pregnant woman. As much as that is shocking, it's horrifying, it makes you angry when you hear it. When you think of prosecuting a case and you're gathering evidence, you're charging a case as an investigator, how much does that motive actually matter?
Well, the motive of I didn't like the condition of the car, I don't buy it. And here's why I don't buy it. He is, when there's evidence recovered from the scene, there's money in the car. There's bloody money in the car. He takes the debit card. He takes her ID. I think his motive is, I think he tries to rob her. I think it's a robbery motive that goes bad. I mean, I've bought and sold a million cars. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. But I don't buy that the motive is he's unhappy about the car. I think it was his intention to do other things. And I think robbery was one of them.
And because also going to the sudden passion defense that sometimes a defense attorney might go with, where they say, you know, if it's like a domestic case and the husband walks in on the wife and then he's so angry in that moment, it leads to a murder. And we've seen that defense be effective at times. In this case, the fact that there was that transaction, at least, where that's what brought these people together, and then a couple days later, this ends up happening, like from the investigators on the ground, how much does that timeline matter in the case that you then bring to the prosecutors in DuPage County and say, well, this is what we believe happened?
It matters a lot. You know the condition of the car. You took the car away. You had the car for 2 days. You couldn't contact the husband to say, listen, there's some problems. You go back. And from what I understand, this happens in the vestibule. It happens as soon as she opens the door. Basically, there's an argument and a struggle. So it couldn't have been too sudden and intense. I mean, it happens right at the door. And I mean, that seems like it's really quick, but you think that maybe there's an exchange of words or there's an argument inside the apartment. But it sounds like he went with the intent to do harm almost immediately as soon as she opened the door. Now, that's not sudden and intense passion. That's premeditation.
I'll be fascinated to see the interrogation video if and when that ever comes out. But it always is, you know, something to watch when you see a detective sit down with someone who's just done something this horrific. And when you read through what we've heard just through reports and from authorities that he was crying, that he eventually leads them to where some of the evidence that he allegedly dumped was located, like, what does that tell you about how the interrogation went and the tactics that detectives used to get enough to be able to say this was the person who did this?
Every interview is different. Every interrogation is different. It depends on who you're dealing with sitting across from you. When you do it for a long time, you're able to read people a little bit. It sounds to me like this kid had a story to tell. And in that situation, you let him tell the story. You let him talk. You let them do most of the talking. You have evidence. You know what you want to ask. But now you're gathering more evidence when he talks. And if there's any kind of conflict or if there's anything that he says it doesn't make sense and you know doesn't make sense, now you go back at him. But in this situation, it sounds like it was pretty free and easy.
I know in some interrogations where when you're watching it and often they release that video after a verdict, so we know what evidence police had at that particular moment. Like, how much are you learning in an interrogation from a suspect as opposed to you enter that conversation already knowing the answers to your questions and you just need them to give you those answers?
Excellent point. And when you talk about that is, yes, in many occasions we go in there, we have the answers. We're going to let them try to lie about it or corroborate it. But you also have to listen to what the person has to say. Because if you go in there with, I know exactly what happened, I have this evidence, now you're in a situation where possibly you're starting to think, I need him to say this, this, and this, instead of just listening to what he has to say and then working your case from there. So you got to be very careful not to have your mind made up when you walk into that room that this is how it went down and this is what this person has to say.
When it comes to this case, and you working in Chicago, have worked a lot of different murder cases, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of really, really difficult scenes. This one just seems to stand out because of the loss of life of a mom, but also the loss of life of the baby that she was expecting. And then you just hear the reasoning at this point that's just, again, so hard to comprehend, with it being this like Facebook marketplace with a suspect who has no criminal history that we know of at this point. Again, he's 19, so maybe something happened in the juvenile years that we're unaware of. But I guess what stands out to you about this case, just based off what you've seen in your career?
You know, I've seen a lot of these robberies, these Facebook marketplace things, these Craigslist deals where there's been a lot of robberies, and there's robbery crews out there doing robberies on these sales. This doesn't look like that. This doesn't look like, you know, this guy's done a pattern of robberies on the Facebook marketplace. For whatever reason, he snapped, or when he was in the apartment 2 days prior to that, he saw something he wanted from that apartment. But one of the glaring things that stands out in this case is in his statement to the police, he says at some point during this attack, she tells him she's pregnant, but he continues on with the attack anyway. So that's actually really big when you talk about putting other charges on him, like the intentional homicide of an unborn child. To prove that, you have to say that he knew that the victim was pregnant. So when he makes a statement saying, she told me she was pregnant, he continued to do the murder, you prove that charge by his own statement.
When it comes to mental health history, because often we'll hear from the defense that will say, oh, this person had schizophrenia, this person had like whatever, and I don't know what his mental health history is. Like, how much are you looking into that when you're a detective on a case? How much does that part of it matter, along with the timeline of what allegedly took place?
So as far as mental health goes, that's a problem for the prosecution, you know, and you're part of the prosecution as a detective. When you're doing the investigation, the nuts and bolts of it is how, why, where, when. Those things you have to answer. Now, is he mentally ill? I don't know. And to be honest with you, as an investigator, I don't care. You know, I don't care what your mental state is. You slaughtered someone. So my job is to put you in jail. Now, we work with the prosecution. There'll be hearings for fitness and all that stuff. That's time of trial stuff. But as an investigator, I don't care what your mental health situation is. I'm not a mental health professional. We don't claim to be. You know, people need help. I get it. I understand mental health. But as an investigator, I don't care. I don't care why you slaughtered these people. I just want to prove that you did.
Well, and the other part too, I mean, I think as you build it up and it's, you know, yes, there was this Facebook marketplace transaction, but what also was the motive the day that he decided, oh, we need to exchange license plates, and then this allegedly takes place. We'll see what happens next. This is just an awful, awful story out of DuPage County, Illinois, just outside Chicago. Retired Detective Commander Will Svilard with the Chicago Police Department. Thanks for helping us make sense of it. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and now you can find episodes of On the Case on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.